So let's start with Andrew, and I'm going to raise that article that you wrote, which I read. Diversity inclusion, has it gone mainstream? Very, very big question mark. It has in a sense, but not entirely.
Well, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for raising that question too. I put an article out on LinkedIn, this must be 2 years ago or so, and it raised this point of diversity and inclusion is now all over London as a theme, as something that people care about. And I was posing the question, does that mean we've won? And I think the answer is clearly not yet. But one of the things that I bring sort of with perspective here is that we started SEO London 20 years ago. And back then they hadn't quite invented the concept of diversity and inclusion in the workplace as a thing that people did. There was not a single diversity inclusion officer in the City of London, frankly. And so when I come at it now and say every firm we work with, and we work with 80 different firms at SEO London, every single one of them has a program with like one or multiple people, teams dedicated to this. So it's gone mainstream. But it's also got to the point where some people are bored of talking about it. And so you can have a conversation now with people who are fed up. They're like, I don't want to hear any more about this D&I business. And so the challenge that the article tried to raise was, what do we do now? Because that's a new barrier that needs to be overcome in terms of its mainstreamness, if you like.
Kenny, you tell us a bit about what that word, that buzzword, which we're all floating around, diversity, what exactly it means to you in your context.
Thank you. So for me, when I think about the word diversity, I guess for me, this very much means in terms of, I think as the name suggests, just having a range of people across the spectrum. And I think when you think about in terms of the workplace, a key thing when people look at diversity, I think a lot of times that is just very much focused on, depends what diversity you're talking about. There's people talk about diversity of thought, diversity in terms of ethnicity or gender. And I think sometimes the problem with the word is that people can use it, but we don't know what aspect we're talking about. Because even when we talk about diversity, the whole topic of intersectionality comes across as well, in terms of actually ensuring that you're able to cater to people who actually may come from 2 different groups or 3 or 4. So I feel like it's a very difficult topic to actually embrace if you don't actually understand how deep it can go. But sometimes I think by focusing on how deep it can go, we can also get lost in actually doing anything in the first place.
Yeah, I agree with that. Adenike, Powerful Media, Powerlist 100, concentrating on black influencers, I suppose, and people of substance and power within the black community. In terms of reimagining black leadership, how do you think that contributes to the debate?
I think with the work that we do at Powerful Media, which encompasses the Power List magazine, which you mentioned, and also Future Leaders, which is the magazine that I manage, and I kind of look at it as kind of my baby. I've seen quite a few future leaders here today, which is great. I think with Powerful Media, in terms of reimagining black leadership, I think what we really wanted to do when we started Powerful Media and started to produce the magazines was really to present leaders, because I think before then, in terms of visible leaders in the media, it was a lot of times it was people in sports and entertainment, people who maybe had profile, who people might consider to be leaders, but there were leaders across the spectrum in so many different industries. And what we try to do with Powerful Media, and I think over the 14 years that Powerful Media has been going, we've managed to do this a lot, is to really unearth people who are doing amazing things, who are great role models in terms of leaders, in terms of the kind of people that young people can look at and see, you know what, I can actually work in this space. I can actually be in tech. I can actually be in banking and reach the top levels. So I think where we fit in terms of reimagining black leadership, we've definitely opened up people's eyes. We've definitely sort of presented people and showcased people and put them in the forefront.
And Mwila, that links directly into you, because your network success looks like you is about exactly that, saying to young people that, the role models are there.
Yeah, so success looks like you connect young people to real black role models. And I think that when we started, it was, similar to Adenike, it's about redefining what young black people feel is possible for them and removing some of those barriers about the industries and careers that we can go into and be successful in. And my background in terms of work is that I was doing a lot of work with young people who were either at risk of exclusion or already seeking unemployment benefits. And when I would meet with them, the conversation, particularly around with the black males, was actually there's certain environments that are not for people like me, or there's certain environments that are not for black people like me. And I think for me it was about shattering some of those myths and debunking them, and really understanding that I think our young people just don't know the breadth of roles that are out there and don't have a connection to people who can show them this is the path that I've taken. So we're really trying to bridge the gap between young black people and then black people, young professionals like the people in this room, so that they can be showing them that you can make it, and this is the way that you can make it, and I'm there to support you. Yeah.
Andrew, did you want to come in on that?
I can make one quick point. When we start our first class back in the year 2000, it was 7 young people that we put into 5 investment banks. Of those, we have a partner at Goldman Sachs, managing directors at Citibank, at Jefferies. We have heads of tax accounting for major shipping companies. We have people running private equity firms in Kenya, in Los Angeles, and folks working financial training in Hong Kong. Now, the spread of that very first class has yielded a spectrum of mentors and role models, so that just as what we're talking about here, about people who can see themselves in the other, that's what we're all about. And so, that was 20 years ago. Now we have over 800 people going through the programs every year, and so we absolutely see that as a central part of what we're all about, fundamentally.
And Kenny, how important do you think the role is of those that have gone before not pulling the ladder up behind them?
Yes, so I think this is a very important topic in terms of when you're looking at mentorship. I feel like mentorship has been extremely valuable for someone like myself, other young people that I know. But obviously if the mic works, that'd be brilliant. Can you hear me? Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to pretend that didn't happen. So, I think mentorship is something that is very valuable to everybody, particularly for young black men. I think the real issue when we think about mentorship is not this, it's another buzzword like diversity, is that everyone just thinks that mentorship is part of being part of a program where you just commit to, seeing this young person, once every 2 months and feeling good about yourself, like you've done something. But for me, I really challenge that and actually say mentorship for me is very much about how do you actually begin to adopt that individual in the same way in terms of just actually investing time, energy, and resources. And I say that very candidly because I truly feel all the mentors I've had, they've truly invested time, energy. It's been a proper relationship, not something where I just meet somebody once a month and it's just very professional. I think you have to be very honest that when you meet people, you're also dealing with the 360 of them, not just one aspect. It's all well and good helping them with their work and their career, but actually the other things are dysfunctional in their life. That's going to end up trickling into work and everything else. I feel like, for me, when it comes to mentorship, it's something that everybody should do. And I feel, particularly in the black communities, that a lot of people talk about stuff and say we're going to do this. But my real challenge is that until we really get to a place of willing to serve each other and stop being so focused on career and realize there's other people who also need to help up the ladder, then actually I think things will begin to change. And I'm happy to have anybody opposes that, but for me, I feel like us being more servant-minded in terms of how we go about leading people and mentoring them, for me, is definitely key to transforming when we talk about black leadership. If that doesn't happen, what's the point? When we have black leaders who are very visible but don't actually serve or feel like actually they're past that. You shouldn't wait until you make it to feel like you can mentor. You can mentor somebody right now where you're at. That's the honest truth.
What he said.
I'm interested in that last phrase, don't wait until you make it. When is that point? When do we arrive at that point when we feel that, yes, I now feel that I have something to offer? Do we ever arrive at that point?
Well, to answer that question, no, because I feel like we're always progressing. But then also, I think I feel like this is a problem when you don't connect to people who are nothing like you at all. And I think when we're talking about young black men, particularly when looking at what's going on at this moment in time, particularly in London, I think people forget how low the baseline is that people are coming from. Some people, all they literally know is their area and Westfields. That's it, literally. And obviously, it's funny here because everyone can laugh because you go to all these places and it all looks nice, but a lot of people, they'll be totally frightened or anxious to come into a place like this. Like they have no experiences of anything other than their community, going to their school and going shopping. And I think a lot of times we could laugh at it, but this is just a real reality. And really, regardless, once you even get into a professional job or you're even at uni, you actually have valuable experiences that you can share with that person and help them to navigate. So for me, that's why I said you can do it right now, because the baseline is extremely low. And we should never take that for granted.
Adenike, I wonder if you can share with us, how mentors might have been instrumental in your path and elaborate on how we do go about passing the baton on.
I think I've definitely had mentors, but I think a lot of my mentors have been like unofficial, people who have kind of sort of taken me under their wing and encouraged me and been very real with me, and I think that's definitely served me well. Which means that now, when you get the opportunity, you also want to do that for other people. I think with the magazine that I edit, Future Leaders, that's one of the big things there. So, for example, all the young people that are featured in the magazine, a lot of, in terms of how they're chosen, is to do with not just, achievements in terms of, I've done this, I've done that, but how have you added value to your community? What are you doing for the next generation that's coming up behind you? And these are young people who are at university, but we already want to just, to let them know that, as Kenny was saying, that, you don't have to wait until you get to certain positions. You can start right there. You can mentor at university. A lot of the young people that are featured in Future Leaders, they go out into schools and they mentor. They have, they start organizations that teach young people how to code and stuff like that. So in terms of the mentorship, I feel like I've had good mentors, but I also like to instill that into the young people that I speak to in terms of how are you adding value. And it's very important to look at what you are giving back to the world, and that should start from as soon as possible.
Mwila, what can people in the room, everyone in the room, do to be that visible presence for, for instance, your cohort in the Success Like You, the young people, 16 to 25? What can we all do as individuals to make a difference?
I think it's what everybody has touched on already, in that first of all, not waiting to arrive at a certain destination before you think you can give back. And the idea that we all have a sphere of influence. I don't think it matters too much about your platform. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter whether it's about career or, family relationships. It doesn't matter the area that you excel in. It doesn't matter the area that you have influence in. All that matters is you recognize that you have gone through things that are valuable for other people, and that you share that. I think that there's something about we live in a world that has a mentality of like scarcity, like that we're short and we're running out of things. But actually, if you have a mentality that's like everything that I have, I can give away, and as I give away, it comes back. I think if we had that mindset, then you know that even if it's just the interaction with the person next to you, even if it's me just sharing, how I got to the place where I founded an organization, or the relationship I have with my mother, it doesn't matter what the piece of advice I'm giving you is. If it's an experience that's unique to me, that I've learned something about myself and can help you, that is all. And I think sometimes when you get into your career, it doesn't matter at what point in your career, we take it for granted that our young people really don't know even the job that their parents are doing in their household. They watch their mum and dad go to work, maybe come back. They don't actually know what it means to be a CEO of a company. The kind of questions we have when we go and do school sessions about jobs, I'm often surprised, but that's because I've taken it for granted that because I'm here and I understand what my job is, that somebody who's 14, 15, 16 understands what my job is. Sometimes just explaining what you do, what it means, the possible salary. So the conversations we have at at school sometimes is, what do you think the average salary is in London? And some of the young people will say something like 100K, and you're like, actually, the reality is the average salary in London is about 28K. Even information like that allows you to start making more informed choices, starts allowing you to understand the context, you know, that you're in, and also understand that that YouTuber or blogger or influencer that you are watching and are really following, and they're talking about this penthouse suite and this handbag there, is that the reality of most of the people that you're looking at? And also, is that the truth? Because then you get people like, you know, Visa Bay, who then says, actually, I was borrowing my designer handbags and that wasn't the reality of my lifestyle. So I think just being honest about where you are, sometimes even with my closest friends, I have conversations around, we're all too shy to say what we're really making in terms of salary. We're all too shy to say what the reality of the challenges that we're having. And I think just some transparency and honesty with young people about the realities of, this is, you know, this is how much I make, these are the bills, this is what I end up with at the end of the month. Just that information, I think, is enough for them to start making some realistic, informed decisions. And I think, particularly in our community, aspiration and inspiration is not what's lacking. I think often our young people dream really big, but sometimes the dreams are really almost like unrealistic. They're not grounded in what's the reality. And I think just sharing transparently with our young people about the world of work, about salaries, about that kind of stuff is a good starting point in terms of what you can do. And you don't need to be making big money or have some special title to be able to do that.
No, I agree with all of that. Apart from disclosing your salary, because I was always brought up to never, ever disclose your salary. Even my children don't know how much I earn. It's secret. Did you want to come in there, Andrew? Did I see a nod of...
I'm always able to add a comment. No, I'd add that I think those are wonderful comments. I think that's exactly right. And to echo some of the stuff that happened earlier, the mantra at SEO London is, it's not about you, it's about the people who come after you. And so every single thing we do has to go with that in mind. So fully on board with all of this. Why don't I let you I can talk. I'll let you.
Okay, all right. Well, I was going to actually get you to round up so we can do some Q&A. So just really talking about the future with black leadership. So I'm going to project you to the future and ask you to envisage what it would look like and what it means for the wider society, for the world.
Okay, I think leadership fundamentally has to be put in a specific context, and it has to be well defined. I think let's focus just on sort of the UK corporate social context. There's clearly a shortage of black leadership in the world here. The way to develop it, I think, is as has been described. I don't think that needs to be too much more developed. But the type of leadership that I think we all want to see is one where it is selfless, where it is servant leadership, where it is putting the other ahead of you. There's a great book called Good to Great. I'm not sure if it's sort of a business school Bible of a sort. And it outlines the categories of companies that have gone from good to great, as the title suggests. The last thing that he talks about in the book is about the sort of concept of the humble leader. And I've read and reread that chapter many times because it just really gets to the core of how you can make a difference in the world around you, in your corporate in this context, by being that servant. So service leadership in the black community will take everybody here a long, long way.
Kenny? Just really... yeah, we're so raptured by what you were saying. Just really reimagining the future, our title with black leadership. What does that look like?
So if I had to reimagine, so if everyone here is familiar with the G20, so I feel for me, when I think about world leadership in terms of global leadership, I think of the G20, which consists of 19 of the world's biggest economies as well as the EU. And obviously, anytime you see those summits which take place, you don't see anybody black, really. The only country from Africa that is there is South Africa. And all the African leaders there somewhere else, so they're at a fringe event. And anytime Africa is very much spoken about in that event, is very much spoken about from a narrow lens of development. In terms of all the other topics to do with infrastructure, global banking systems, wherever the future of the world is going, Africa is very much not mentioned. However, for me, given the growing population in terms of you look at somewhere like Nigeria, for example, if you look at in a few decades, it's going to be the third most populous country in the world. If you look at by 2100, or 2100, however you want to call it, 1 in 3 people will be African. So when you think about the direction that the world is going, it's very clear to see that actually black people as a population will very much be a significant part. And I feel like when we're thinking about the future, for me, it would be to actually see a G20 summit where you are seeing much more representation in terms of where Africa is actually at the table and not just on the menu. And for me, that is really what I want to see. And actually seeing leaders of character representing us, which for me is very key.
Thank you. Adenike.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Oh, sorry to his answers.
Stop being so interesting. Everybody forgets the question. Just to reimagine the future under black leadership, what it means for society, what it ultimately means in the world.
I think for me, I'm going to say something a little bit different in terms of when I think of that, I just think of at the moment in all the industries that we can think of, and especially an industry like tech, which is just growing so phenomenally right now and growing so big, I'm thinking to myself that if we had more diverse people in different areas, can you imagine how amazing things would be? Because there'll be so many sort of different viewpoints. And I think at the moment, in terms of what we can actually sort of achieve in an area like tech or so many different industries, I think it's just very narrow right now because there's the same people at the top. Do you know what I mean? So it's through that lens that a lot of things are being developed and a lot of things are being made, a lot of things that are really leading the world right now. And I feel like in terms of black leadership, when we start to have black people in those spaces, it just means that there's going to be different opinions, there's going to be different ways of looking at things. And that can only be an amazing thing for the world because yeah, I mean, when I think of something like that, it just makes me feel excited at the prospect because I just feel like, I mean, we just can't even imagine what it would look like because at the moment it's not there. So for me, that's what I think about. I think about just every area, every industry, and I just think that just imagine how much exciting, how much more innovation there could be if there was just different opinions, different viewpoints, different people. So that's how I sort of see it.
Your enthusiasm there reminds me of the joke of the woman that tried to book a fare to Wakanda, and they had to say it doesn't actually exist, but it paints a very lovely picture. Mwila, same question to you. Do you remember it?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Go to the top of the class.
It's the title of the panel, so I do remember it, definitely. I think maybe to approach it from a different perspective, thinking about leadership as personal leadership and the idea that intrinsically as human beings we are creative, and I think that where our creative energy becomes most alive is when you're allowed to be yourself. And I think that creativity also flourishes in difference. So I think that when reimagining the future with actually more diverse leadership is about reimagining a world where you are authentic and allow yourself to be the most creative that you're able to be. So to try and arrive at the point, I think that first of all we have to think about ourselves individually and think about how we're leading in our own space, how we are enabling our own creativity to flourish. In our individual lives, are we operating at our highest creative potential? And if we're doing that and then we go out into our spheres of influence with that highest level of creative potential and you bring that with another creative energy that's different from yours, I think that's when you drive change, that's when you drive innovation. And I think where we're seeing our world right now, even politically, is because there isn't enough difference in creative energy at the points where we're making decisions around the table. And so for me, reimagining the future with black leadership is reimagining a future where we all give ourselves permission to show up in our spheres of influence, where we give ourselves permission to be our highest creative energy, and where we bring that creative energy to spaces where we don't feel like it's welcomed and are okay with sharing that and are okay with having almost not combative, but conversations where there is such a diversity of thought, diversity of people, that it can be almost explosive, but then you can get to the point where we reach a consensus together. So for me, I think Reimagining the Future with Black leadership is Reimagining a future where we all give ourselves permission to show up, give our most creative, highest potential, and just contribute to the conversations that are happening and being a part of that conversation. Yeah.
Show up and give up.
Show up and yeah.
Thank you. Oh, go.
Could I add this?
Go.
So I think that's fantastic and extremely well said. I would add to it that it's the other side as well. So that world where we show up to our environments and are ready to give. There's also the whole long process of shaping the environment so that it is welcoming of that, because otherwise it becomes risky to actually be your authentic self. So,
thank you. Thank you, panel. Thank you, panel. Yes, you can hear me. So we'd have to quickly open up the floor. Oh, there they go. Right. Is there a mic? There's a mic coming to you.
My name is Ike Anya, and I used to be Deputy Director of Public Health for Kensington and Chelsea, but now I run a consulting firm in Nigeria called EpiAfrique and Nigeria Health Watch. And I wanted to ask the question because it's not about having diversity and ticking the box, diversity and inclusion officer. It's also creating the environment. I've sat on boards where you have to encourage that Black person, that woman, that gay person, and make it clear that it's okay for them to say those dark, deep, scary things. And if you don't, it's a tick box. And I'd like to know, in your experience, how many companies which have appointed diversity and inclusion officers, where are the actual impacts in output in terms of how their staff has changed? If you are aware, I'd like to hear.
Very well said. So I suppose really to boil that down to a nutshell is how do they demonstrate their effectiveness, these officers, if they exist? What are they doing? How do we measure their success?
the industry is one which it suffers from a data problem. On one hand, you'll see big statistics thrown out by a big consulting firm or this or that saying diversity is great, and here's a 25% result or a 50% increase in this or a decrease in that. Those numbers I find them very hard to believe on a regular basis because you can make statistics say just about anything you want. I'm a former banker, so I know how statistics work. On the other hand, it's an industry that's dominated by anecdotes. But the anecdotes are powerful. The trouble is there's not enough of them at any given time to sort of promote an agenda to deliver a sense of what the results are. We're embarking on a project at SLLY London called 101 Diversity Success Stories. We're going to try and get as many anecdotes as possible to sort of put it in one place, and we can use that as a resource. But with respect to firms, we work with 80 firms. They all exist along a spectrum of development. They start the very first square as we don't see an opportunity here, or we don't have a problem here, or what are you talking about? At the very far end, you have firms that have said, oh my gosh, we've got this, diversity and inclusion is a core value, it's something that we need to execute against, and they are making moves. All of those companies all the way along will have some sort of effort around diversity and inclusion in this day and age, at least the big firms. But there's always, even if you're at that amazing firm, and there are a few firms who absolutely do get it right, they have someone in that operation who's back at square one, who doesn't think this is an issue or a problem, right? So I think it comes down to what are the goals of the organization? I mean, what are you measuring? I'll tell you, a friend of mine went into a major grocery retailer, and he said, you know what, I'm going to change this place. And he just went out and hired a whole slew of black candidates into an organization that had no black people in it before. And he just, and they didn't fire him, so he said, I'm going to keep doing it till they fire me. And so this yielded a whole sort of cohort of talent that was able to then go off and do 100 different things over the rest of their careers. But that's one level of impact that is real, tangible, and no joke. Setting more sort of broad scope targets is just, it will devolve into sort of a tick box exercise unless incentives are tied to it. Until you get in that annual review or that quarterly review, someone's got to answer the question, how have you made this environment a more inclusive place, a more diverse place? You know, there's a certain large firm that we work with who will not be named. Their CEO said, we need more black talent in this operation. Here are the numbers, work on this, I'll be back. He went away, came back 6 months later, the numbers had not changed. He said, was I not clear? And now, I'm sure some of the people in this room have been receiving calls from that firm saying, we got to change, we got to move the dial on this. So change does have to come from the top. Measurement is what you're measuring against, what are your specific goals. There are leaders, there are laggards. I feel like when I look at the 20-year view, we've come a long, 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 long way. But we have a long way to go.
Just because of time, I'm going to move on to another question. So there's one here at the front, second row.
Hi there, my name's Lauren. I'm currently the Director of a Tuition Centre, and I've been really appreciating what you've been talking about because I'm actually transitioning out of this role. Reason being, a big thing I was reflecting on is you've spoken about like being a servant and really putting back into the community. And throughout my entire life and career, I've spent a lot of time working with people, nurturing people, working with families, working with children, which I've absolutely loved. However, you've also talked a lot about finding your authentic self and your authentic voice. And I'd love to just know from your perspectives whether you nurtured this within yourselves whilst also helping others, or whether you had to kind of take time back and work on yourself and then give back to the community, or whether you actually just stumbled across something and the two were kind of working in conjunction. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that.
Adenike.
I think for me, because I think it's going to be different for different people. I think when I started my career, I think my job was I didn't see it at the time because it was a job that I always wanted to do. It was an entertainment journalist. And I really loved that job. I got to do a lot of things. I got to travel, got to meet a load of interesting people. But then there came a time when I just started to feel a bit like there's something missing. Do you know what I mean? There's something missing. I feel like, and then there was something in me that just felt like there was something more that I needed to do. So I think that kind of naturally happened. And then I just kind of gravitated more towards doing something where it was more about interacting with people, like people who you felt that you could help, that you could, give to, you could, help build up. And that was something I think that just happened naturally. I think that it is important to have that in mind, as we've spoken about, in terms of service, but I don't think it's something that you should be doing to the point where you're feeling now, well, what about me? I'm sort of drowning, or I feel like, it's everybody else, and because you can't really give to anybody else if you're not actually, feeding yourself. So I think it's something that you really every individual needs to really sort of think about. And I feel like you will kind of know that it sounds like from what you're saying that you've got to a point now where you maybe do feel that you've been giving, and not that you don't want to continue to do that, but maybe now you're thinking, hang on a minute, I'm actually sort of maybe forgetting about myself a little bit, so maybe you need to just kind of work out how to balance the two. But I don't think there's any good in sort of giving of yourself to the point where you're now literally, losing yourself. So I think each person sort of kind of knows in their spirit when they need to kind of change things up. But I think just about being very aware and just making sure that you also think about what's good for you as well, because then you can be good for other people.
Thank you. Now, I'm used to sticking to news deadlines which go to the second. I need to know whether that applies to this venue. Okay, it does. So, unfortunately, that means we have to round this up. Thank you very much. Please thank the panel for their contributions this afternoon.